The night I left Alexander Kane's mansion, I did not take his money, his diamonds, or the last name he once tried to make sound like a promise. I took back my own heartbeat. Rain slid down the tall windows like the house itself was crying, though nothing inside that place had ever been allowed to look weak. The marble floor was cold beneath my shoes. The hallway lights glowed soft and gold, touching the portraits, the carved doors, the silent men in black suits who stood along the walls as if they had been built into the mansion instead of born into the world. None of them stopped me. Maybe Alexander had ordered them not to. Maybe they were too shocked to see a woman walk out of his life with a suitcase in one hand and no fear left in her eyes. The clock above the grand staircase struck 3 in the morning, each note rolling through the house like a warning. I had packed less than I owned when I arrived 6 months earlier. 2 sweaters, 1 pair of jeans, my mother's old photograph, a paperback novel from the library, nothing that belonged to him, not the silk dresses hanging untouched in the East Wing closet, not the pearls he said looked right against my throat, not the silver bracelet he gave me after the first time I told him I felt watched instead of protected. He had smiled then, tired and beautiful in the cruel way storms are beautiful, and said, "You are protected because you are watched." I should have known that was the beginning of the end. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped beside the long black table where fresh white roses waited every morning, cut to the exact height I once said I liked. Beside the vase, I placed the silver ring he had given me. Not an engagement ring. Not exactly. Alexander Kane did not ask for things the way other men did. He decided. He claimed. He wrapped control in velvet and called it safety. The ring made the smallest sound when it touched the marble, but in that silence, it felt louder than a slammed door. Behind me, one of the guards shifted. I heard the soft brush of his sleeve. Then another sound came from the far end of the hall. Slow footsteps. Measured. Familiar. My fingers tightened around the suitcase handle before I turned. Alexander stood beneath the archway to the west corridor, wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, his dark hair slightly uncombed, as if sleep had lost a fight with him again. He looked at the suitcase first, then at the ring, then at me. For once, the most powerful man in New York did not know what to say. His blue eyes moved over my face like he was searching for the girl who used to soften when he entered a room. But she was gone. Maybe she had disappeared the first time he mistook my silence for obedience. Maybe the last piece of her died when he locked the East Wing doors and told me it was for my own good. "Emily," he said, and my name in his voice still hurt. That was the worst part. I wanted leaving to feel clean. I wanted anger to carry me out like fire. But love does not leave neatly. It drags its hands along every wall. It remembers every soft moment, every almost apology, every night he sat across from me in the library pretending not to listen while I read his mother's favorite poems aloud. "Are you leaving me?" he asked. The guards looked away. Even the mansion seemed to hold its breath. I looked at the man who could buy buildings, silence rooms, and bend powerful people with one quiet phone call. Then I looked at the open front doors behind him, where rain waited like freedom. "No," I whispered. "I'm returning myself." His face changed so slightly that anyone else might have missed it. But I knew Alexander. I knew the muscle that moved in his jaw when he was afraid. I knew the stillness that came over him when something hurt too deeply to touch. He did not step toward me. He did not raise his hand. He did not give an order. And somehow, that made it harder to walk past him. My shoulder brushed the cold air around his body, and for one foolish second, I wanted him to stop me in a way that would prove he loved me without owning me. He didn't. Outside, the driver opened the car door without meeting my eyes. I climbed in, soaked by the rain before I even sat down. Through the window, I saw Alexander standing in the doorway of his mansion, surrounded by light, power, and everything I had finally learned to survive without. He had locked down cities for less. But that night, he let me walk out. And I think that was the moment his heart followed me. I did not look back after the gates opened. That was the first lie I told myself. The car rolled down the long private road, past the black iron fence, past the hedges trimmed so perfectly they looked unreal, past the security cameras that had followed every step I took for half a year. I kept my face turned toward the rain-streaked window and promised myself I would not search for him in the glow behind us. But when the mansion slipped into the distance, my eyes betrayed me. Alexander was still standing in the doorway, a white shirt in a house full of shadows. A man who had once made entire rooms go silent, now silent himself. Then the road curved. The trees swallowed him, and the place that had held me disappeared. My driver did not speak. His hand stayed fixed at 10 and 2 on the wheel, his eyes trained on the slick pavement, as if one wrong glance at me might turn him into a witness. Maybe he had been told not to talk. Maybe he knew grief had a sound and did not want to hear mine. I pressed my palm against my mouth and breathed through my fingers, slow and careful, the way people breathe when they are trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. I had expected freedom to feel lighter. Instead, it felt cold. It sat beside me in the back seat with wet hair and trembling hands. It smelled like leather, rain, and the faint trace of Alexander's cologne still clinging to my coat. 40 minutes later, the driver stopped outside a small motel off the highway, one of those places with buzzing neon, ice machines, and curtains that never quite closed. He handed me an envelope without turning around. Inside were $500 in cash and a note written by someone else, not Alexander. Safe accommodations have been arranged. I almost laughed. Even in letting me go, he had tried to manage the leaving. I gave the envelope back. Tell him I do not need his arrangements, I said. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror for the first time. There was pity in his eyes, and that almost broke me. Miss Carter, he said softly, he did not arrange this. He only said to make sure you got wherever you asked to go. That was worse. I stepped out into the rain with my suitcase and paid for a room with the emergency money I had hidden in the lining of my bag months ago. The room smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. The heater rattled like it was tired of living. I locked the door, slid the chain into place, and stood there until my knees forgot how to hold me. Back at the mansion, I learned later, breakfast was served at 7 exactly. Black coffee, grapefruit, toast cut diagonally because I had once told the kitchen it looked kinder that way. Alexander did not come down. The staff waited. The guards changed shifts. Phones rang behind closed doors. Cars arrived and left beneath the gray morning sky. Everything continued because that was what his world did. It continued. It obeyed. It moved around pain as if pain were furniture. But Alexander stayed in the East Hall, where the ring still rested beside the roses. He did not touch it. He did not ask anyone to remove it. By noon, his second-in-command had a list of airports, train stations, hospitals, and hotels within a 100-mile radius. Alexander looked at the pages once, then set them on his desk. Find her, he said. Then, after a silence long enough to change the air in the room, he added, do not approach her. No one knew what to do with that kind of order. They were trained to retrieve, to guard, to close distance. They were not trained to respect absence. That was the first thing I ever took from him. Not his money, not his name, not his power. I took away the belief that wanting someone was the same as having the right to reach for her. Before I ever walked out of that house, I walked into it with a canvas tote bag, rain on my sleeves, and no idea that loneliness could wear a custom suit. 6 months earlier, the Kane Mansion did not feel like a place where people lived. It felt like a place where decisions were made about. People who would never see the rooms where their lives changed. I arrived at 9 in the morning with a contract from a private restoration company, a thermos of coffee, and a pair of scuffed brown boots that squeaked against the marble floor. I had been hired to organize and restore the personal library of Eleanor Kane, Alexander's late mother. That was all the email said. 12 weeks of work. Excellent pay. Discretion required. I needed the money, and I knew books. At 26, that was the closest thing I had to a career plan. The front doors opened before I touched the bell. A tall man in a charcoal suit greeted me by my full name, checked my identification, and led me through a foyer larger than my entire apartment in Queens. The air smelled like lemon polish, old stone, and fresh flowers. Everything was beautiful. Everything was watched. Cameras tucked into corners. Men standing near doorways without pretending they were staff. A silence so perfect it made my breathing sound rude. The library sat in the west wing behind double oak doors carved with vines. When they opened, I forgot to be nervous. 2 stories of books rose around me, dark shelves climbing toward a painted ceiling where soft morning light spilled through tall windows. Dust floated in the sun like tiny ghosts. There were leather-bound first editions, poetry collections, art books, family ledgers, and stacks of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. For the first time since entering that mansion, I felt something human. Someone had loved this room, not owned it. Loved it. I set my bag down and reached for the first box on the central table. That was when I heard his voice behind me. Most people ask permission before touching my mother's things. I turned too quickly and almost knocked over my coffee. Alexander Kane stood in the doorway, taller than I expected, dressed in a dark navy suit that looked severe in the morning light. His hair was black, his eyes blue, and his expression had the calm stillness of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. I should have apologized. I should have lowered my eyes the way everyone else seemed to. Instead, I held up the work order with one hand and steadied the box with the other. Most people hire archivists when they want archives handled properly, I said. The room went quiet in a different way. The man who had brought me in looked horrified. Alexander only stared at me. 1 second. 2. Then something almost like amusement touched his mouth and disappeared before it became a smile. You are not afraid of me, he said. I am afraid of water damage, silverfish, and people who fold book corners, I replied. You have not made the list yet. That was the first time I saw him blink as if I had surprised him. He stepped inside, closing the distance with the kind of control that made every inch feel intentional. He looked at my old boots, my rain-spotted sweater, the pencil tucked behind my ear, then the careful way my hand rested on the letters instead of grabbing them. My mother hated careless people, he said. His voice had changed, softer, but only by a shade. Then she and I would have gotten along, I said. Alexander looked past me to the shelves, and for a moment, the mansion, the guards, the money, and the danger all fell away. He was just a son standing in the room of a woman he missed. I saw it before I knew better than to see him. That small wound behind all that power. That quiet place no one else was allowed to name. He caught me watching, and his eyes sharpened. What? He asked. I should have said nothing. I should have remembered that men like him did not invite honesty. But the truth slipped out before fear could stop it. You look lonely, I said. Not dangerous. His face went still. Somewhere in the hall, a clock ticked once, clean and loud. I thought he might dismiss me. I thought he might tell me to leave. Instead, Alexander Kane stepped back, opened the door wider, and said, Then fix the library, Miss Carter. I did not know then that the library would become the safest place in that house. I did not know that he would start appearing every afternoon, pretending to check on progress while listening to me talk about cracked spines and old poems. I did not know that a man could begin as a warning and slowly become the voice I waited for in the hallway. I only knew that I had been hired to restore what his mother left behind. I never imagined he would expect me to restore him too. Alexander began visiting the library at 4 every afternoon, though he never admitted that was what he was doing. The first time, he stood near the fireplace with his phone in one hand and said he only needed a document from his mother's estate files. The second time, he claimed the West Wing was quieter than his office. By the third week, he stopped inventing reasons. He would enter without knocking, sit in the leather chair beneath the tall window, and read reports while I cataloged Eleanor Kane's books across the long oak table. We rarely spoke at first. The silence between us was not empty. It had weight. It had breath. It held the scratch of my pencil, the soft turn of pages, the distant hum of engines beyond the gate, and the steady sound of rain whenever the weather turned gray over the Hudson. I learned things about him that no file could have taught me. He drank black coffee with no sugar. He hated when people stood behind him. He never answered a call from an unknown number, but he always answered when the head gardener asked about his mother's roses. He slept badly. Some nights, I would arrive in the morning and find a lamp still glowing in the library, a glass of untouched water on the side table, and one of Eleanor's poetry books open beside his chair. He never said he missed her. Men like Alexander Kane treated grief like a locked room, but I could see the key in his hand. One Thursday afternoon, I found a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon at the bottom of a cedar box. They were from his mother, written during the last year of her life. I did not read them. I placed them on his desk and left the room. 10 minutes later, he found me in the hall. Why did you not open them? He asked. His voice was sharp, but his eyes were not. Because they were not written to me. He looked at me for a long moment, as if privacy was a language he had forgotten people could still speak. After that, something shifted. Fresh coffee appeared beside my workstation every morning. The broken heater in my Queens apartment was repaired by a company I had never called. My student loan balance suddenly showed a payment I had not made. When I confronted him, he did not look guilty. He looked certain. You needed help, he said. I needed the dignity of asking for it, I answered. He frowned, genuinely confused, and that hurt more than arrogance would have. Alexander understood danger. He understood loyalty, debt, strategy, silence. But kindness, to him, was something delivered from above. Protection was a command. Love was a perimeter. He started sending a car for me, even when I took the subway on purpose. A guard began waiting outside the library door, then outside my apartment building, then across the street from the small grocery store where I bought soup and oranges after work. Each act came wrapped in care. Each act took something from me. At first, I told myself it was his world, not his heart. I told myself a man surrounded by threats did not know how to be gentle without making rules around it. And there were gentle moments. Real ones. Like the night the power flickered during a storm, and he brought candles into the library himself, his expensive shirt damp from the rain because he had gone outside to check the backup generator. We sat on the floor between stacks of books, candlelight trembling over his face, and he listened while I read one of Eleanor's poems aloud. When I finished, he said, so quietly I almost missed it, she would have liked you. My heart folded around those words. That was how it happened. Not all at once. Not like lightning. More like a door opening 1 inch every day until I forgot it had once been closed. I began to wait for his footsteps. I began to know the difference between his public silence and his private one. I began to believe the man in the library was more real than the one the city feared. But love does not survive on almost. By the 5th month, I was no longer just restoring books. I was adjusting my life around his fear. I stopped seeing friends because he said their neighborhoods were not secure. I stopped taking the train because he said he could not protect what he could not track. I stopped arguing in front of his men because his jaw would tighten, and I hated the way everyone watched us afterward. He called it protection. I called it disappearing. The worst part was that he never meant to hurt me. He only kept building walls and calling them proof that I mattered. One evening, as I stood in the East Wing staring at a closet full of dresses I had never chosen, I finally understood that a velvet cage was still a cage. And somewhere inside that beautiful mansion, the girl who had once walked in with scuffed boots and a fearless mouth was becoming someone quiet enough for Alexander Kane to keep. The night everything broke, the house did not raise its voice. That was what made it terrifying. No alarms. No shouting. No sudden crash of doors. Just a change in temperature. As if the mansion had taken one quiet breath and decided I no longer belonged inside it. I was in the library, sorting Eleanor Kane's letters by date, when the West Wing doors opened and 3 men stepped in behind Alexander. Caleb Ross stood closest to him, neat as always in a gray suit, silver hair combed back, face arranged into the kind of concern powerful men use when they have already chosen the outcome. I had never liked Caleb. He smiled without warmth. He called me Miss Carter in a tone that made my name feel borrowed. Alexander did not sit in his usual chair. He stood near the fireplace, his hands at his sides, his blue eyes fixed on me with a stillness I had learned to fear. On the table between us, Caleb placed a folder. Internal schedules were accessed from this room, he said. Private transportation routes. Meeting locations. Names that should never have left this house. My pencil rolled from my fingers and stopped against the edge of a book. What are you talking about? Caleb opened the folder. Printed logs. Timestamps. A copy of my temporary access card. My signature on a checkout form I had never seen. It was all clean. Too clean. The kind of evidence that did not look discovered. It looked arranged. I looked at Alexander, waiting for the insult in his eyes to vanish. Waiting for him to remember me. The woman who had protected his mother's letters. The woman who never opened a drawer without permission. The woman who had told him the truth even when it cost her comfort. Alexander, I said, and my voice sounded small in that enormous room. I did not do this. He did not answer quickly enough. That was the wound. Not Caleb. Not the folder. Not the men watching me as if my face might confess for me. It was the pause. The space where trust should have stood. Alexander looked down at the papers, then back at me. Until I know what happened, you will stay in the East Wing. I stared at him. For a second, I thought I had misheard. Stay. You will be safe there. The word safe moved through me like ice water. Safe had become his favorite cage. Safe had followed me to grocery stores. Safe had stood outside my apartment. Safe had taken my choices one by one and dressed them in expensive excuses. You think I betrayed you. I whispered. His jaw tightened. I think someone used you. That is not better. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if gentleness could soften the bars he was building around me. Emily, there are people who would use your kindness against you. I need to control the situation. No, I said. My hands were shaking now, but my voice held. You need to control me. The room went silent. Caleb looked down, but I saw the smallest satisfaction at the corner of his mouth. Alexander did not. He only saw the threat of losing order. He only saw danger wearing my face. This is temporary, he said. So was the car outside my apartment. So was the guard at the library door. So were the dresses I never asked for and the schedule I never agreed to. My throat burned, but I refused to cry in front of them. You kept calling it protection because that sounded kinder than possession. Something flickered in his eyes then. Pain, maybe. Anger, maybe. Fear, almost certainly. But he still did not say the only words that could have saved us. I believe you. Instead, he gave a quiet order, and the men near the door moved aside to create a path toward the east wing. No one touched me. They did not have to. In that moment, Alexander Kane did not need chains to make me feel trapped. He only needed my love for him and his doubt about me in the same room. I walked past him with my head high, though every step felt like leaving myself behind. At the threshold, I stopped and turned. He looked older suddenly, not less powerful, just more haunted by the thing he was choosing. You once asked why I was not afraid of you, I said. I think I finally am. His face changed, but I did not wait to understand it. The east wing doors closed behind me with a soft click. Not loud, not cruel, just final. And that was when I knew I would leave the mansion, even if I had to break my own heart to do it. The east wing was beautiful in the way expensive things become cruel when they are not chosen. Pale curtains, ivory walls, a bed large enough for two people who no longer knew how to stand in the same room. A silver tray waited on the table with tea, fruit, and a folded note from the housekeeper asking if I needed anything. I almost answered it. I almost wrote my life back. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the lock settle into place on the other side of the door. It was not a prison, Alexander would have said. There were windows. There were books. There were fresh towels and a private bathroom with heated floors. But every comfort became a witness to the one thing missing. Choice. I did not sleep that night. I walked the room in my socks until dawn painted the ceiling gray. By morning, anger had burned through the softer parts of my grief and left something clear behind. Caleb had made one mistake. He believed I was only kind. Men like him always confuse kindness with weakness because they have never had the courage to practice it. I knew the library better than anyone in that house. I knew which floorboard near the south shelf creaked. I knew the service hallway behind the old map cabinet had not been sealed properly. I knew Eleanor Kane had hidden things in books because lonely women with powerful husbands learned to make paper safer than people. When the guard outside my door stepped away to answer a quiet call, I moved. Not fast. Fast makes noise. I moved away. I had moved among fragile books for 6 months, careful, patient, certain. The service passage smelled like dust and cold stone. It led me behind the library wall, through a narrow door hidden by shelves of old travel guides. My hands shook as I pushed it open, but the room was empty. For the first time since Alexander doubted me, I stood in the place where I had once believed he saw me clearly. My chest hurt. I let it hurt for 3 seconds. Then I got to work. Caleb's evidence had been too perfect, but perfection leaves fingerprints. I pulled the access logs from the library computer, then compared them with the restoration schedule I had kept in my own notebook. The timestamps said I entered the archive room at 8:47 on Tuesday night. My notebook said I was with Mrs. Walsh in the kitchen, drinking chamomile tea while she cried over her son leaving for college. Mrs. Walsh would remember. The security camera near the kitchen would remember too. Then I found the Rayol wound hidden under Caleb's polish. A transfer record buried inside a maintenance file. Someone had cloned my access card 2 weeks earlier through the security office. The authorization code belonged to Caleb Ross. I stared at his name until it stopped being a name and became the door out. I printed everything. Logs, camera references, authorization records. Then I placed them in Eleanor's old copy of Little Women, the book Alexander never touched because the inscription from his mother made him look away. On the first blank page, I wrote one sentence. I did not betray you, Alexander. You betrayed what you knew about me. The house had begun to wake. Footsteps moved in the hall. Voices lowered near the staircase. I slid the book back into its place, took one thing from the shelf, and pressed it to my chest. Eleanor's worn blue notebook. Not because it belonged to Alexander, but because it held the map of every secret passage she had drawn in careful ink. I think she knew one day another woman might need to leave a beautiful house quietly. By midnight, the rain had returned. I packed my suitcase. I left the dresses, the pearls, the bracelet, the life he had built around me without asking whether I wanted walls that high. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, my heart was not steady, but it was mine. I placed his ring beside the white roses. Then I walked toward the front doors, carrying the truth behind me and freedom in both hands. I did not see Alexander find the book. I only know what Mrs. Walsh told me months later, with tears in her eyes and flowers still dusting her apron like snow. She said the mansion stayed awake after I left. Not loudly. Alexander did not rage through the halls. He did not break things. He did not order the city turned upside down, though everyone expected him to. He stood in the foyer long after the car disappeared, staring at the ring beside the white roses as if he had finally found something his power could not translate. Then he walked to the library. Alone. That was the part people remembered. Alexander Kane was almost never alone. Men followed him like shadows. Phones rang before he reached for them. Doors opened before his hand touched the handle. But that morning, just before sunrise, he dismissed everyone outside the West Wing and shut himself inside the room where we had once learned how to be gentle with each other. He must have known where to look. Maybe because I had left the chair slightly angled toward Eleanor's shelf. Maybe because grief has its own instinct. Maybe because some part of him still listened when I was gone. He found Little Women between two travel journals, pulled it down, and opened to his mother's handwriting first. Mrs. Walsh said he stopped breathing for a moment. Then he saw my note. I did not betray you, Alexander. You betrayed what you knew about me. Those words did what no enemy had ever done. They made him sit down. Not like a boss. Not like a man planning his next move. Like someone whose knees had simply forgotten their duty. The papers slipped from the book one by one. Access records. Camera references. Caleb's authorization code printed in black ink, so plain it looked almost merciful. The truth did not shout. It did not need to. It lay there on the oak table between Eleanor's letters and the coffee cup I would never use again. For 6 minutes, Alexander did not move. Then he called for Caleb Ross. Not with anger. That would have been easier. His voice was calm, and in that calm, the whole house changed shape. Caleb entered wearing the same polished expression he had worn when he accused me, but Mrs. Walsh said it faded when he saw the open book on the table. Alexander asked him one question. Why her? Caleb tried to explain. He used words like liability, distraction, weakness, risk. He said I had made Alexander hesitate. He said I had softened decisions that needed to stay hard. He said a man in Alexander's position could not afford a woman who made him look human. Alexander listened to every word. Then he said, you were right about one thing. She made me human enough to see you clearly. What happened to Caleb after that was quiet, legal, and permanent. No spectacle. No cruelty. By noon, his accounts were frozen, his access removed, his allies exposed, and his name erased from every room he had once entered without knocking. But the stranger thing was what Alexander did afterward. He did not celebrate. He did not call it justice. He walked into the East Wing, opened the door of the room where he had kept me, and stood there until the afternoon light went gold across the floor. The closet full of dresses remained untouched. The tea tray had gone cold. The bed was made too perfectly, as if the room itself was ashamed. That evening, Alexander gave his first impossible order. Remove the locks. Not just mine. Every private lock in the East Wing. Then he gave another. Find every debt connected to families who had borrowed money for medical bills, rent, or school, and cancel them. His men stared at him like he had spoken a language from another life. He did not explain. He only looked toward the library and said, I am done calling fear a system. In the weeks that followed, I heard pieces of him through strangers. A landlord in Queens stopped threatening an old tenant. A clinic received anonymous funding. A women's shelter in Brooklyn suddenly had new beds, new locks, and no name attached to the donation. I tried not to care. I tried to tell myself repentance was easy when you had money. But every quiet act carried the shape of something I had once said in the library. Alexander was not trying to buy me back. That would have been familiar. He was trying to become someone who would have believed me the first time. And somehow, from miles away, that hurt more than his doubt. I lasted 7 weeks in Maine before Alexander found me, though found is not the right word. Men like him could find anyone if they wanted to. What mattered was that he waited until I could feel the shape of my own life again before he stepped into it. I had rented the small apartment above a bookstore in Camden under my middle name, Grace, and every morning I opened the shop with salt air in my hair and the sound of gulls crying over the harbor. The town was nothing like New York. No black cars at the curb. No marble hallways. No men lowering their voices when power entered a room. Just fishing boats, fog, church bells, and neighbors who asked how I took my coffee because they planned to remember. I shelved novels, repaired torn pages, and helped tourists choose paperbacks for rainy afternoons. At night, I sat by the window with Eleanor Kane's blue notebook on my lap and tried not to think about the West Wing Library. Some memories fade when you leave a place. Others follow you like perfume on a coat. Alexander was in the way I noticed blue flowers. In the way I drank coffee black for 3 bitter mornings before admitting I still hated it. In the way silence sometimes felt safe, and sometimes felt like a door waiting to lock. Then, one gray afternoon in late October, the bell above the bookstore door rang, and every part of me knew before I looked up. He stood just inside the entrance, rain darkening the shoulders of his wool coat, hair damp, face thinner than I remembered. No guards. No driver visible through the window. No command moving ahead of him. Just Alexander Kane, holding his hands where I could see them, as if approaching a frightened animal he had once mistaken for something tame. The woman buying postcards glanced between us, sensed something private, and hurried out with a polite excuse. The bell rang again. Then there was only the rain, the shelves, and the man I had loved enough to leave. Emily, he said. My name sounded different now. Not claimed. Asked. I stayed behind the counter because it gave my knees something to believe in. How did you find me? The bookstore received a shipment from Queens, he said. Your old neighbor mentioned it to Mrs. Walsh. Mrs. Walsh told me because she thought I was ready to hear your name without reaching for the door. That almost made me smile. Almost. Are you? His eyes dropped for 1 second, then returned to mine. I am trying to be. The old Alexander would have stepped closer. This one stayed where he was, rainwater gathering at his shoes, letting the distance remain mine. He reached into his coat slowly and placed a silver key on the counter between us. Not the ring, not a gift, a key. My breath caught before I could stop it. What is that? The East Wing, he said. My hands went cold. He saw it, and his face tightened with regret. Not as it was. Never as it was. I removed the private rooms. The locks. The guards. The entire wing is being converted into a shelter and legal aid center for women and children who need a safe place that does not ask what they can pay. He slid a folded document beside the key. Your name is on the deed. Not mine. If you want nothing to do with it, Mrs. Walsh will manage it. If you want to burn the papers, I will understand. I only came to return what I took from you. I stared at the key until it blurred. The East Wing had been the place where love became a room I could not leave. Now he had turned it into a door other people could open. That did not erase what happened. Nothing beautiful ever erases pain that easily. But it changed the shape of it. You cannot fix me with a shelter, I whispered. I know. His voice broke softly on those 2 words, and he did not hide it. I am not asking you to come back. I am not asking you to forgive me today. I am not even asking you to believe me. I just needed you to know that the place where I failed you will not fail anyone else if I can help it. For a long moment, I could not speak. Outside, rain moved down the window in silver lines. Inside, the bookstore smelled like paper, cedar, and the kind of second chances that do not announce themselves loudly. I looked at Alexander, really looked, and saw no throne, no mansion, no city bending around him. Only a man standing in a small shop, learning that love without freedom is only fear wearing a softer name. What do you want from me? I asked. He looked at the key, then at me. Nothing you do not choose. That was the first answer he had ever given me that felt like an open door. I did not go back with him that day. That mattered. The old me might have mistaken his apology for a bridge and run across it before checking whether the other side was real. But the woman who left the mansion had learned that love without time can become another locked room. So I let Alexander stand in the bookstore while rain softened the world outside, and I told him the truth. I need to know who you are when I am not there to reward you for changing. He nodded once, like the sentence had entered him somewhere deep. Then I will show you from far away, he said. And he did. For 3 months, he did not call unless I called first. He did not send cars. He did not send gifts. He sent reports through Mrs. Walsh, plain and boring and beautiful in their honesty. Permits approved. Construction finished. Staff hired. Legal team assembled. First family moved in. No photographs. No grand announcement. No building with his name carved over the door. The East Wing became the Eleanor House, named after his mother, because he said she would have understood what it meant to make a home safe without making it small. I read every update at the little kitchen table above the bookstore while the harbor fog pressed white against my windows. Some nights, I cried. Not because I had forgiven him completely. Forgiveness was not a light switch. It was a road. Some mornings, I hated him for becoming better only after breaking something precious. Other mornings, I hated myself for missing the sound of his footsteps in the library. Healing was not graceful. It was coffee gone cold, unopened letters, and choosing myself again even when my heart kept reaching backward. Then winter came. Maine turned silver and quiet. The bookstore windows frosted at the corners. One evening, a package arrived with no expensive wrapping, only brown paper and my name written in Alexander's careful handwriting. Inside was Eleanor's blue notebook. Beneath it, a single page. I found one more passage he had written. It belongs to you. On the last page of the notebook, in faded ink, Eleanor Kane had drawn the West Wing Library and written, "A house is not redeemed by the man who owns it, but by the people who are no longer afraid inside it." I sat with that sentence until the sun went down. 1 week later, I bought a train ticket to New York. Not because Alexander asked. He did not. Not because the past had vanished. It had not. I went because some doors deserve to be opened twice. Once to leave, and once to see whether the room has changed. The mansion looked different at sunrise. Or maybe I did. The black iron gate stood open. No guard asked why I had come. No camera turned like an eye following prey. The long driveway was lined with winter roses, pale and stubborn against the cold. When I stepped into the foyer, the marbles still shone, the portraits still watched, and the clock above the grand staircase still measured time in deep golden notes. But the silence was different. It was not fear. It was waiting. Mrs. Walsh saw me first. She covered her mouth with both hands, then hurried toward me with tears shining in her eyes. "He is in the library," she whispered. Of course he was. I walked through the West Wing slowly, past open doors and sunlit halls, until I reached the room where everything had begun. Alexander stood near the shelves with his back to me, dressed in a dark sweater instead of a suit, sleeves pushed up as he repaired a loose book spine with careful hands. He turned when he heard me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes moved over my face with a tenderness that did not ask to own what it saw. "Emily," he said, "just my name. Nothing more." I placed the silver key on the table between us. "I came to see Eleanor House." He looked at the key, then at me, and I saw hope rise. In him carefully, like a man afraid to startle a bird. "And after that?" he asked. I walked to the window where morning light touched the floor in warm squares. Outside, people moved through the East Wing garden. Women with children, staff carrying boxes, a little girl laughing beneath a white rose arch. The place that had once held me had become a place that helped others breathe. I looked back at Alexander. After that, we began slowly. His throat moved. He did not step closer until I did. That was how I knew. Not because he had changed the house. Not because he had punished the right man or paid the right debts. But because the most powerful man I had ever known had finally learned to wait at an open door. He once ruled the city by fear. But I only loved him when he learned to open his hands.